Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Dunu Falcon Pro. This is Dunu's latest IEM. It's a single dynamic driver earphone. It's about 220 bucks, and I think this IEM's comes at kind of an interesting time. We've just, I recently reviewed the THUMPS Hana 21, which I really like, around the same price range as this. And then also, Moondrop is coming out with the new Kato, which also priced kind of similar to this. And so I've spent the past couple of weeks living with the Dunu Falcon Pro and comparing it to some of the IEMs that I've got on hand now to really try and figure out where does this one land in that sort of milieu of single dynamic driver earphones around 200 bucks. So yeah, this is, let's see, anything else to say about it? It's a 10mm dynamic driver. It's got an Eclipse driver, if that means anything to you. I don't know that it means too much to me, but Tom will definitely tell you otherwise. Otherwise, I don't know. I think we'll dive into the review. And in this review, I'll talk about the build, physical aspects of this IEM. We'll talk about the sound quality, what it sounds like. And then to contextualize it, I will compare it to a handful of other single dynamic driver earphones that I've got on hand. If you're looking for the comparison, however, to the Kato, that's going to have to wait. I'm going to compare this with the Kato when I do my Kato review, probably in about a week or so. But for now, if you have any questions about the Falcon Pro, like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. So if you're here now, you have a question, please do leave it in the live chat. And at the end of the review, after I get through all my spiel, we'll have a little back and forth conversation and hopefully answer all of your questions. But for now, let's just go ahead and dive to the table, jump to the table, and dive into the Dunu Falcon Pro, including all of the accoutrement that it comes with. And sorry for speaking in tongues or whatever's going on here right now. But yeah, this is honestly quite the spread for an IEM in this price range. And, I don't know how much you personally value getting a nice accessories package, but when I'm spending money on an IEM and getting this amount of stuff with it, generally it feels pretty good, if I'm perfectly honest. And just do a quick overview of what you get inside the box. So one, cases. You actually get Dunu's pretty nice case. It's in a little bit of a different finish than their other cases, but I quite like the look of it, to be honest. It's a nice sturdy zipper. It's got the these little wings on the pouch that kind of keep it from opening 100%, and for some reason I like that. I'm not sure why, but generally love this case. But they also include this, and to be frank, I did not use this. This is basically a little pouch or sleeves to put your individual earpieces in. I personally find this sort of mechanism just way too fiddly for me, but if you're really particular about making sure that the stainless finish on your earphones is preserved, I suppose you'd appreciate having something like that. Otherwise, well, let's give you a quick view of the tips that come with the Dunu, and you'll notice I don't actually have them all splayed out here. I just have one sample of each type to show you because there are 4 different types of ear tips, and these all come in multiple different sizes. So as you can imagine, actually, just to reiterate, look at all these ear tips. Those are all the ear tips you get with the Dunu Falcon, and this is kind of a close-up of what they look like. I believe this is a style that was on them as their stock ear tip. I've used these ear tips before on some Dunu earphones, and I do like the rounded shape in general, but the materials, I wish it was a little bit grippier. You've got these ones, which are kind of interesting. They almost have like a TWS style fit where you can see they're actually pretty short, which will allow the earphone to fit deeper into your ear bowl, your concha, if that's an issue for you. They've got these ones, which are, I don't know, maybe kind of somewhere in between, a little bit nicer of a rubber than what you got on here. And then finally, they've got these ear tips, which, to be frank, kind of feel a lot like Sony hybrid ear tips. Right? It seems like a clone of Sony hybrid ear tips, and what that just means that they've got like a nice gummy rubber to them. They are color coded on the bottom if you forget what's up. But generally, I think this was the ear tip that worked best for me, was the color coded Sony hybrid clones. But yeah, it's nice that they have a fair collection for you to find a good fit for yourself. Of course, we also include a little toothbrush of some sort for cleaning out the gunk in the teeth of the earphone. What else do we got? We've also got a 3.5 to 6.3 millimeter adapter, which frankly is not very common with earphones, although Dunu does seem to include this with pretty much all of their stuff. What's interesting though is that they still have not made a swappable 6.3 millimeter termination, which I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about the cable terminations in a little bit. Before I do though, maybe a quick view of these, which are actually swappable nozzles. These are like little tuning nozzles for the Dunu Falcon. These basically just kind of unscrew from the sheet here, and then they screw into the Dunu Falcon Pro, and they do actually produce different frequency responses. What are the different names? They've got transparency, they've got balanced, and they've got atmospheric immersion, and that one just means bassy, to be frank. But yeah, if you're interested in checking out what those differences are, take a look at a link in the description down below to squig.link, where I've got frequency responses of the Falcon Pro with all three of the different tuning nozzles, so you can kind of get a sense for what they do. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that in the sound, but to be frank, I pretty much just stuck with the stock balanced tuning nozzles. Okay, that's not everything yet. I didn't mention actually you get a nice microfiber towel, which is why I've got that laid out here. Oh, on the note of the nozzles, before I move off those, they actually include spare gaskets, which is interesting because the nozzles have these little rubber gaskets in them that allow them to just kind of fit and screw in a little bit more securely. And maybe those can fall off. You can lose them, and I guess it's nice to have spares, or maybe you can find something else to do with these. Maybe if you need to tighten your braces or something. People still do that, 2021. Okay, let's talk about the cable. And as I'm doing this, the first thing I'll talk about is the fact that this is Dunu's new swappable termination style. We've talked about Dunu swappable terminal cables before, and this is just a new version that they're releasing that supposedly is making this cable and this swappable functionality available at a lower price point. I don't know how much they're going to sell this cable for on its own, but it does come with the $220 Falcon Pro, so I guess that's a sign there. But yeah, these terminations, actually, you just pull this out, and now it goes from a 3.5 millimeter cable to a balanced 4.4 millimeter cable, which is nice for them to include that option. I definitely, I like this trend of earphone companies coming with the swappable terminations, and Dunu's mechanisms I generally like better than most others. This one versus the more expensive Dunu style, I don't frankly know that it's any worse. The other style maybe has like kind of a neater sleeve mechanism where you pull back the sleeve and then it releases it. But apart from being kind of a little bit more mechanically neat, it frankly doesn't really make much difference. Although again, Dunu still hasn't done a swappable 6.3 millimeter termination. You still gotta stack them like this, which frankly not a big problem because I would never use a 6.3 millimeter terminal on an IEM. Okay. Let's talk about the rest of this cable, which honestly is frankly a pretty solid cable. You can kind of get a sense for what it's like here. It's a well-behaved cable, a little bit on the stiff side, but not enough that I'm going to complain about it. I'll mention it just because I'm describing the thing, but honestly, I really quite like this cable. And you can see it's got a nice, let's punch in on that so you can take a look. It's got these sort of wound style. It almost looks like little pearls or something like that, but I don't know. It's not super fancy. It's just honestly a nice solid cable. You do have a relatively small Y split and then a chin slider, which if it's not super secure. You can see the chin slider moves around. And frankly, most of the time when I was wearing this thing, I don't need a chin slider for this IM, but it did find it kind of moving itself around, especially as I was winding up the cable, as you see me doing right now. I don't know. If you're going to include a chin slider, might as well make it stay in place, but not a big complaint for me on this IEM. But then that's going to bring us up here to the top of the cable where you've got your preformed ear hooks, and these are MMCX connectors. Some of Dunu's IEMs come with MMCX, some come with 2-pin. I'm not sure how they make their decision, but the Falcon Pro is one that comes with MMCX. And again, as I say often, I don't actually have a preference between MMCX and 2-pin. I do like that at least these MMCXs are fairly tight in terms of like their rotation. When there is an MMCX cable and it rotates freely too easily, that can be a little bit fiddly, but here they're nice and tight and they hold their place, which I like. And I think that's about as much as there is to say about the cable. So let's just go ahead and talk about these earpieces, which you've probably been ogling as I handle this cable. And honestly, these are really pretty handsome earpieces here by Dunu. They are an all metal shell, as you can probably tell. I'm guessing a stainless steel of some sort. And it is polished on the outside with kind of like a Louis Vuitton inspired design on the outside rim of the earphone. You could probably see better pictures of this, honestly, on Dunu's like Instagram page or something like that, where they've got close-ups. But it's an interesting look and an interesting pattern. Here's kind of that pattern also repeated on the packaging, if you doubted my Louis Vuitton references. But yeah, it's, I think, honestly, a pretty handsome little earphone. The earpieces themselves are actually a little bit, trying to show this on camera, they're actually a little bit thinner and more shallow than they kind of appear in pictures and sort of the head-on view. So you can see that they are, you know, relatively small, and that's going to play into the fit as I demonstrate in a bit. But maybe while I'm down here, I'll show you the nozzles. And again, this is, I'm using the balance nozzle, and just to show you how it unlocks, you just unscrew it. It reveals, I guess, the dynamic driver inside there. But then the nozzle screws back on, and you can see maybe that little yellow gasket there. So that's what the spares are for. Hopefully don't have to worry about that. Probably not going to be swapping my nozzles too much, but I don't know. I guess it's nice of them to have covered that. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about how this thing fits. And honestly, the Dunu Falcon Pro I would describe as fitting kind of similar to something like Moondrop's Starfield, KXXS, etc. Which is to say, plugs into the ear nice and easy. It's not especially large, as you can probably tell inside my ear. Generally, I find it comfortable. And so if we're talking about the ergonomic scale, it's right. It's like the ease of fit, check. Comfortable? Yeah, comfortable enough. Not like super comfortable, but it just kind of disappears in there. But then the third point about fit security, I would say it's average fit security, which just means, especially if I'm like lying in bed or something like that, it can come loose a little bit, break seal sometimes, or if I'm chewing or talking. But for the most part, honestly, because it fits so well inside my ear, and this is going to depend really a lot on which ear tips you use and the size of your concha, I suppose. But let's see if we can kind of show that. It's like inside of this little nubbin, what do you call it, the tragus or something like that. And because it's inside that my tragus is essentially adding a little bit of extra security to the fit, which helps. But for the most part, I mean, it's not like a super custom molded IEM the way that something like a THUMPS audio might fit in terms of giving you that really secure fit. But for the most part, honestly, don't have any complaints about it. The one thing I did want to mention while I'm plugging this thing into my ear, and I can actually demonstrate it down here at the table, is this thing is surprisingly heavily vented. Let me go ahead and take off the ear tip so you can fully appreciate it. But you can see there is a series of vents here on sort of the base of the nozzle, and then there are also two vents down here at sort of the body, or where the cavity of the body is. And that actually plays into the openness of the IEM, or plays into the isolation, right? I know I've talked about this before, like different IEMs, as you plug them into your ears, will isolate more or less from the environment in terms of blocking outside sounds. And I personally don't actually have a strong preference. I know for a lot of people, it's important to have an IEM that isolates well. Like if you're taking it on public transit or something like that, and you need to block out outside sound, you want something that isolates well. And honestly, because of that openness here with the Falcon Pro, isolation is actually kind of poor here. For me, it's not actually a problem. Like I mentioned, I don't really have a preference in my daily usage of IEMs, whether or not it isolates very well. Not that important to me. But if it is important for you, definitely a point worth noting. Okay, and on that note, I'm trying to think, is there anything else I need to talk about? The physical aspects here of the Falcon Pro. Let me consult my notes, but I'm pretty sure that's just about it. Okay, let's dive into talking about the sound of this earphone. That's why you're here. And like I typically do, I'll just start by describing the general tonality of the Falcon Pro, just what it roughly sounds like, and then we'll go into the details about what I like about it and what I maybe don't like about it. And the general tonality here on the Falcon Pro, I would describe is kind of like a warmish, full sounding V-shaped sound signature. Honestly, in tonality, it's the earphone that I have that's probably the closest would be something like the Final E500, which is an earphone I would generally describe as like warm neutral. And this one, I think, even though it's pretty similar in tonality, I think this one crosses into sort of V-shape just because there is actually a little bit, quite a bit extra bass emphasis, and definitely in the listening experience. And then also maybe a little bit more brightness in sort of the mid treble. The upper mid-range here on the Falcon Pro, I would say, is relaxed. It does put vocals a little bit back and behind that mid bass. And then that bass character that's here. Honestly, the bass here on the Falcon Pro is, I would describe, a dominating aspect of the sound here. Not that it's like an overwhelming amount of bass or anything like that, just when you're listening to it, the bass character is kind of like the party trick here. And that's actually plays into the description of this video. The title of this video is describing it as "It Thumps," because the bass character here is really strong. But it is mostly mid bass, right? It extends okay into the sub bass regions, but really this is all about kind of that mid bass punch. And then again, you know, despite you've got that relaxed upper mid range, you've got that forward mid bassness. You might expect a little bit of a hazy, I don't know, maybe bloated sound, but there's actually a little bit of treble brightness, maybe like mid treble brightness that honestly adds a strong sense of clarity here to the Falcon Pro. And that's where it kind of gets, I would describe again, that V-shaped sound signature. Not like an extreme V-shaped sound signature, but it is, in my opinion, a V. So that's the general sound signature here of the Falcon Pro. What do I like about it? So like I was just kind of describing there at the end, that bass character is really quite dominating. But honestly, and generally, you know me, I'm not necessarily the biggest bass fan. Like, I'm not looking for a lot of bass in my audio, but just because also, frankly, like a lot of the times when there's too much bass in sound, you just get this sense of muddiness, and at least for me, it can kind of spoil the sound. Here with the Falcon Pro, however, don't have that problem at all. I would describe this as kind of like a heavy, just generally a heavy sound, but actually still pretty strong on clarity. Despite the warm tone, I think definition here on the Falcon Pro is quite good. The bass that's here, generally very tight, controlled, and beyond that, also just really pretty authoritative. Like, the bass has got a nice physicality to it. And if you recall my review of the Dunu Zen, which was maybe earlier this year, that was an earphone where the bass just had this raw physicality to it that really made that earphone pretty special. And honestly, here, the Falcon Pro, this thing costs like a quarter of the price of the Zen. And I think it's got a bit of that bass character that the Zen's got, that really makes this pretty satisfying to listen to. That clarity that I described that you do still get here with the Falcon Pro, I think it gives the Falcon Pro actually pretty decent imaging chops. Not like outstanding imaging chops, but really pretty decent, and I have no complaints about it. And I think some of that comes from the brightness in the treble. So that's what I like about the Falcon Pro. What are the things maybe I don't love about it? Well, let's talk about it. So tonally, this is not like my target, which is fine. Like, every earphone doesn't have to be exactly my preference. And tonally, I would say the things here that are not quite to my preference is just the mid-range, the vocals are definitely back in the mix, somewhat relaxed, and maybe even in certain songs, and depending on the vocal and the recording, honestly, vocals can come across maybe just slightly on the muffled side here with the Falcon Pro. So that's one issue I have with kind of the general tuning. The bass here, again, a lot of really good stuff to say about the bass, but if I'm getting picky, it doesn't quite rumble in the low notes that well, again, because it just doesn't. It's mostly mid-bass focus, so you get that physicality to it, but you don't quite get that sense of rumble and that added sense of depth from the sub bass because it seems to roll off a little bit. The bass character, again, if we go back to the tonality, it is more dominating than I like, but in certain exceptions, I can make exceptions and it can be pretty fun. And honestly, here with the Falcon Pro, it's pretty fun. But then the last thing I wanted to mention here about the sound is that the treble, I mentioned there is a little bit of brightness in there that helps cut through the thickness and the heaviness of the sound otherwise. And I think that's a welcome bit, but it can tend to sound a tad bit on the splashy side, a little bit unrefined, maybe a little bit sloppy at times. Most of the times it's fine. And this is primarily with the aforementioned balanced nozzles. Yeah, I did find that the treble can just occasionally be a little bit problematic, not entirely 100% smooth. So those are the things that maybe keep this thing from being a perfect sounding earphone, right? And then I guess while we're on the topic, I should have talked about these when I was talking about the general tuning of the sound, what the different nozzles do. And again, these do actually make a measurable difference, and you can hear the difference. The transparency nozzles, as you might expect, they increase the treble presence, which in some cases actually made it improve the tonality a little bit for me, but I found that it came at the expense of some of that bass character that I liked. So for me, that's why I didn't prefer the transparency nozzles. And then here with the atmospheric nozzles, these kind of further recess the upper mid-range in the treble and subdue it and makes the bass character maybe a little bit more dominant, but I found that it tended to soften the sound a little bit too much for me. So I preferred the stock nozzles. Those are the ones that seemed the best to me, and that's what I liked about listening to the Falcon Pro. So that's kind of the general sound of this and how I would describe it in isolation. But how do I compare it in sort of in context to some other IMs? Well, let's talk about that. So as I move this stuff to the side, there's a lot of stuff here to move to the side. I'll also slide in, we'll call them our competitors for the day. And here we've got the Tantrum Hana 2021. Here we've got the JVC FDX1. And then I'll also pull in the Sennheiser IE300. And then I guess maybe before we start talking too much about the sound, just a quick price breakdown on these things. The Hana 21, this is I think $180. The Falcon Pro, again, $220. The JVCs are $250, sometimes on sale. And then the Sennheisers are $300. And then the one thing that these things all have in common, price is similar, but the one thing they all have in common is they are all a single dynamic driver. In that, I don't know, some people are really into single dynamic drivers. I'm personally, I don't know. I appreciate a single dynamic, but that is neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and talk about how these things compare in a handful of different categories. And part of this is going to be me ranking them. Part of this is preference too. But yeah, let's just talk about how these things are tonally. And some of this is a little bit difficult. Some of this is not too difficult. But how I would rank these things in terms of tonality, again, to my personal preferences. So I would say the Sennheisers are probably last. I would say the JVCs are probably the best. And then the Hana 2021, and then the Falcon Pro. So the way that I would describe these tonally, and I'll try to describe this in a way that you can make up your own mind because this is very much up to personal interpretation. The FDX1 I would describe as kind of a lean, bright neutral, very much mid-range and treble focused. There is a decent character to the bass, but definitely not an IEM for bass heads. The Hana 21, I would describe this as kind of a tasteful V-shaped sound signature, pretty typical V-shaped sound signature, but it's big on sub bass, not so much on mid bass, so you do get a nice sense of depth to it, and vocals are somewhat forward with a little bit of a wispy airness to the treble response. So yeah, that's the general tonality here. The Falcon Pro, we've talked about this already quite a bit, but kind of a warm V-shaped sound signature, more about its mid bass with a little bit of brightness in the treble. And then here with the Sennheiser IE300, also I would describe as a warm V-shaped sound signature, but the upper mid-range, the vocal region is definitely more subdued here on the IE300, where this is definitely a lot more about mid bass and sub bass and some like upper treble zing. But it does give you, in my opinion, kind of like the warmest, most relaxed tonality, but with that upper treble that kind of cuts through and keeps it being totally laid back. But that's kind of the general tonality here. Let's talk about them now in terms of technicalities, and this is kind of a stand-in for a bunch of different things, but how I would rank these in terms of technicalities, honestly, I would probably leave them about the same. I think for what I like in sound, the FDX one just really does quite good with sort of the micro contrast in mid-range, the vocal detail and stuff like that. Not necessarily the biggest stage. Imaging is, I would say, pretty decent here on the FDX one, but not especially stand out. It really is all about just that sense of mid-range resolution, if you like that word or not. But yeah, I think the FDX one does that best. Next up, I would say the Hana, and this is less so about that micro contrast detail, and much more about just this really kind of exaggerated sense of head stage and imaging. It's a lot of fun, frankly. And definitely a standout characteristic here of the Hana. Again, detail I don't think is quite up to snuff with this, but if you prefer, or if your preference is specifically in imaging capabilities and just, again, that sense of space, that sense of 3D-ness and really quite exaggerated, the Hana, that's really where it excels. Next up, I would say the Falcon Pro. I think imaging is pretty solid on here. Maybe, I don't know, maybe about on par with the JVC. But then that bass character is really, really what is appealing here about the Falcon Pro. It's just got this body and heft to it that, frankly, none of these other IEMs do. Like the JVC does have a nice bit of physicality to the bass, but because it's so light on bass, it can be hard, or it can be easy to miss sometimes. Whereas here with the Falcon Pro, there's really no missing the bass character. It is there. Yeah, and in terms of like detail, mid-range detail, because of that upper mid-range recession, I don't really get much of a sense of sort of that vocal texture and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad on detail. And then finally, that will leave the Sennheiser IE300, which is, frankly, I think it's just a little bit too mid-bassy, and because of that, it doesn't have quite the same sense of precision and incisiveness that you get with, frankly, all three of these. I think are quite a bit better in terms of that definition and detail. But decent head stage on this. It gives you kind of like a different effect because of that recessed upper mid range. But for the most part, I find this to be a little bit soft on the edges and the transients. Yeah, in general, this is not the most technical IEM. And then finally, let's rank these things in terms of their ergonomics, where this is actually gonna kind of just rotate clockwise in terms of ergonomics, in terms of the fit and comfort and ease of use and stuff like that. Frankly, I think the Sennheiser IE300, that's where this thing really excels. These things are so small. They've got like a negative profile inside the ear, which just means that you can like lie down on your side and the earphone's not actually going to touch your pillow or whatever you're lying down on. Generally very secure. I think the ear hooks are formable, like they are bendable, and that can add to a little bit of extra fiddliness in terms of the fitting process. But for the most part, I think the fit, the ergonomics here on the IE300 are pretty exceptional. Next up, honestly, I would say the Hana and the Falcon Pro are about on par. The stems here on the Falcon Pro are a little bit longer, so I think it'll probably be easier for more people to get a nice secure fit. But both of these IEMs fit me about the same, which is they plug in nice and easy. They disappear into my concha, so they're pretty comfortable. Neither of them is especially secure for me, but neither of them is really a problem. And that will leave the JVC FDX1 in last place in terms of ergonomics. Just generally, I find these things pretty fiddly to fit for a number of reasons. One, they're pretty heavy on this earphone that doesn't have preformed ear hooks, or this cable without preformed ear hooks. The nozzles rotate, which allows them to fit over ear or under ear. That's nice, but it also means that sometimes the nozzle's rotated in a way that doesn't match my ear. And then just generally, they're a little bit bulky. You can see here, like the body of the earphone is pretty bulky in terms of sort of the ingress to the ear canal. And because of that, one, again, it can be a little bit of work for me to get a nice seal, but then also these just aren't very secure in my ears. And that was just kind of always my biggest issue, frankly, with the JVC. If the JVC sound was in something like the Sennheiser, that might be my last earphone. But alas, ergonomics are a thing, and that's how I rank these ones. So I think that's going to do it for all my thoughts here on the Dunu Falcon Pro. Frankly, a lot of good stuff to say about here. You know, tonally, you got to make up your own mind about whether or not a warm V-shaped sound signature with definitely a bass dominant tilt is your thing, but I think it's going to be a lot of people's thing, if I'm perfectly honest. And out of 5 stars, I will give it a very, very solid 4 stars. The Dunu Falcon Pro is going to be an earphone I imagine I will be dipping into periodically just for fun, because it does have that bass character that's just really, frankly, pretty addicting to listen to. And for some of my music, like especially Men I Trust, was an artist that this just worked really quite well with. It's kind of like laid back vocals, female vocals with electronic music, just kind of like simple music with just really nice bass thumps, and it adds a really interesting dimension when I'm listening here with the Falcon Pros. But I think that's going to do it. Shout out to Dunu for sending these things in for review. If you're interested in checking out the Falcon Pro, I do have a link in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this video helpful, you're having a good time, it's Friday evening. It is Friday evening and you're enjoying this. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you in the next super review. Unless you're here live, in which case, hang out and let's have a little chat.